Next, I'll be introducing Dr. Peter Macki, who will be discussing the resilience of Somaliland informal economy workers during and after conflict and the challenges and opportunities of today.
You can spot the lecturer who is utterly dependent on slides in order to give a public talk. We will get there if we don't have a login. Perhaps I'll start the introductions whilst we wait. Firstly, Noswetha, good evening. Diolch yn fawr, Macki. Did I get it? Macki, for the invitation to come speak. I am clearly not a Somalilander, but I do consider myself an honorary Somalilander, having spent a significant amount of time in Hargeisa and in parts of Hargeisa that many locals haven't spent time in Wahen Market and others, Gobanimo. So I'm very familiar with Hargeisa. I've had many a conversation with taxi drivers around here about the ins and outs of those markets in Hargeisa. So I do feel an incredible affinity to Hargeisa and to Somaliland. So I really am grateful for the invitation to come and speak. I am an academic, so I am going to talk about research. And the project that I'm going to talk about is focused on the informal economy. That's my specialism. I understand the informal economy. But a lay audience would have no interest in the informal economy. What I'll do in my discussion is talk about people's resilience during a period of intense conflict, and that experience of resilience and the importance of that resilience and self-help in the process of economic development after conflict. And I draw on research undertaken in Hargeisa, and we were focusing on urban informal economies. But it's part of a much wider project. So we were looking at Hargeisa in Somaliland, but also further afield, we were looking in Nepal, in Kathmandu, in Colombia, in Egypt, and in northern Iraq, in Kurdistan. So it was a comparative project, and I'll at times just draw out what was significant and really quite different about the experience in Somaliland, where we think there's international lessons to be drawn. Yeah. We think the experience in Hargeisa offers a pretty unique experience of self-help. What happened when the United Nations wasn't there to help? Or when the help of the United Nations was actually rejected and peace was achieved through the elders. Do we have, it looks like we may slowly be getting a PowerPoint. Okay, so that's some way of introduction. I should say this isn't me. I didn't do the project on my own. I had wonderful help from Eid Ali Ahmed here, who is my Somaliland hero. But also Professor Alison Brown, Mohammed Badawani from Sonsaf in Hargeisa, and Dr. Saeed, who's president of Golis University. So it was a truly collaborative effort. And the research is based on, could somebody bring up the slides as well, is that okay? The research is based on interviews with around 200 people. 200 people. 50 of those people had experienced the conflict and could reflect on what had happened, their experiences during that time and afterwards. So that's what I'm going to do, is reflect on some of those key findings. I had so many lovely pictures for you as well. It wasn't all going to be text. I'm going to keep ploughing on anyway. So let's talk about the context, which lots of you will be far more aware of than I am. And it's a harrowing experience to be told and to learn about from the mouths of people that experienced it. And the quote that stands out the most, if we're to talk about the context, was the words of General Saeed Barr in Kill All But the Crows. Yeah, those words, I think, sum up all we need to know about the conflict and its devastating impacts. In none of the other countries or cities that we were talking about, yes, look at how good those slides are. See, they were worth waiting for. Okay, we're going to get there. Where's the arrow? How do I move it forward? forward. There we go. Yes, we're good. Don't touch anything in case it turns off again. Right, so that's the standout words. Yep. Kill the crows, the devastation that was experienced. And what we're looking at is what happens in the absence of UN support when people try to self-solve and manage in those conditions. So, when that's the context, when planes take off in the local airport and the bombs land on the city in which they've taken off from, it's utter devastation. And so inevitably the economy suffers. And we talk about three things. People talked about three things. I have nobody to sell to. I have no market because people have fled. We have a lack of security. Those that have remained are suffering these sorts of incredible challenges in terms of their security and the security of their businesses. And then the utter devastation of infrastructure. And you can see that in the architecture in Hargeisa, that so little remains for historically. So what happened? We've had the conflict, we've had the devastation, and these are the stories that we're able to bring out from people. Replacement services, the resilience of people who, in the absence of government provision or UN provision, people provided those basics. So the informal economy provided, so whether it's food, water, electricity, transport. And I reflect on perhaps the best example, and this is one that we really hold up and shine a light on, is Havayoko, which still exists as an NGO out in Somaliland, where, following the conflict, they were brought in from the conflict, these young workers, to come and tidy up the streets, to build back the infrastructure, lay down arms, build the infrastructure. Yep, and take small amounts of money from the local community. That was self-help. That wasn't a UN spend. That wasn't a UN program or project. That was local young people delivering the needed services. That enabled the sort of peace that emerged and the economic development that emerged afterwards. Community solidarity and trust. So we talk about money transfer systems being used, Franco-valuta, of which some colleagues in the room were probably involved in moving goods and money over borders in order to survive post-conflict. The gender roles. Now we know that conflict disrupts gender norms. We've seen that in post-World War II in the UK. But we saw it in a prolific way in Somaliland, the way that the conflict disrupted previous gender roles, where women came into the workforce and played a really important role in post-conflict recovery. And I'll give you one really, really good example. So we talked to people that had made the journey from Hargeisa into Ethiopia, into the camps. Men were fighting women in the camps, and some of the women in the camps that had been in the camps told us of their stories of taking the UN rations. And this is what happened. This was the impact of the conflict. Taking the UN rations, which were awful, repackaging them, adding bits and bobs to make them something really quite palatable, and then selling them to the passing nomads. That is the entrepreneurial spirit of the Somalilanders that we picked up on. And that was a real change in the gender roles. Because when women then returned to Hargeisa, we see women taking up roles in a way that we didn't see in many other countries, particularly conservative Muslim countries. It was a really, really interesting and important finding. It's not all positive and rosy in terms of the economy. We did see the emergence of some what we might call war economies or conflict economies. And perhaps the most significant here is the cat economy that really grew during and after the conflict. And it's something that we've dealt with locally in Cardiff too. And I'll reflect a bit on that in a minute too. Right, so how many of these kind of positive disruptions lasted? So the informal economy, people working without necessarily legal permits, without necessarily being registered, but also without social security protections and employment protections, continues to be a major part of the Somaliland economy. We're talking about around 70% or more of the economy. In some ways, you could say the informal economy is the economy. And yet, when we visited last, when we first visited, the informal economy wasn't being talked about by those that were seeking to plan for the country's future or the city's future. Yeah, and yet, that's where people are working, that's where the economy is. And actually, Eid will talk a little bit later about what's happening now as a consequence of the research, where these people, this 70% of the population, their contributions are being recognised and valued. Yep, so the informal economy is still playing this really important role today. In terms of solidarity, so we talked in terms of the conflict, the way in which it created this solidarity, the sharing economy and other things. And this is where the comparative research is really important, because Hargeisa stands out in such a significant way from the other cities we visited in the low levels of harassment that we see of informal economy workers. And it's characteristic of the society that we've experienced and we're seeing in Hargeisa. Yeah. We don't have harassment of folk working on the streets like you would have in most of the Latin American cities, or in Karachi in Pakistan, for instance. And then there's this trust amongst the local population, amongst the urban population. And people say to me, Pete, how did you manage going to Hargeisa? Wasn't it terrifying? And this is the photo I always pull out. So you can see here, this photo. Right? That's a pile of cash on the street. Go stick that outside this building at my university. How long do you think it will stay there? Yeah? This trust, this understanding, the person exchanging that money could go to the toilet and come back and not worry that was gone. Yeah? Trust. Now, whether that's a result of the conflict or whether that existed before, I don't know, but it's there. Okay? Nearly there, don't worry. Right, lasting gender impacts. We talked about this really important disruption to gender roles, and it really is significant. That's lasted, so women continue to play a key role in the workforce. But we do have to recognise, when we look at the statistics from our work, they appear to be more vulnerable than men in the workforce, in terms of literacy levels, incomes, etc. So it's an area that we would want, if we're looking to intervene now, today, an area that we would want to do something. Very nearly there. And as I mentioned, we had the emergence of what we call war economies, or the cat economy. It's a really big contemporary problem in Hargeisa. That flow of money largely into Ethiopia, yeah, that drain, but also the social and health issues associated with the cat economy. And we had this as part of the research, we had this really interesting workshop where we had the anti-cat movement, so a mix of men and women who were against cat, and then cat traders in the room together, and we were just discussing the nature of the problem, and they collectively recognised the challenges, its importance to the economy, and it's an integral part of society, but also the challenges that we're talking about here. And it's just something we need to think about for the future. Right, so moving forward, I'm nearly there. The last point is to reflect that I've given you a very quick whistle-stop tour of what happened during conflict and after conflict. The research is there. You've got a synopsis of the contemporary challenges, which Eid will also talk to later. But actually, in none of the other cities we've looked in has the trajectory of development, of achievement of peace, of achievement of peaceful democratic elections, with changes in government, yeah, we've not seen that in any of the other case study countries. Yeah, and that's been done through a self-help process. So we're really strongly advocating that the world looks in on how that was achieved. How if you don't treat peace and economic development as a project, yeah, as a project to be achieved, and you let that be led by local people, that actually good things happen. Following our work, there is, and I say our work, we did the research, and then Eid Ali Ahmed is continually knocking the door and talking with officials to ensure that the informal economy, that 70% of a relatively poor population, are having their work planned for. And that's what's happening now. And finally, perhaps the most important thing is, I'm here, I'm the voice in Cardiff, but that's because the workers can't be here. Yeah, informal economy worker voices at the heart of what's happening, the voices of some of the poorest in Hargeisa are at the heart of what's happening. They've organised themselves following the research, and they've been given a platform through which to be heard. So that's a really, really positive step forward. Diolch yn fawr, Mhatsanid. Thank you very much.
Bring on Eid Ali Salam to really give us basically his research in terms of the entrepreneurial spirit of the Somaliland people and their resilience. So I'd like to welcome Eid Ali Salam to the stage.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all attending this meeting. In fact, we organized this within a very short period, and we thank you all those who attended this meeting. And the reason was that we were doing this, conference or meeting, and tiling that with the Dagahtur, which is a national day. That's the throwing stones, which was on the 20th. Then, there are some gaps, as you see, but I think it's okay, to convey what we want to say about Somaliland. The past has been talking about, the panel. Also, the recovery also has been discussed. Now, what I'm going to do is, I was part of this research. I think we started this about 9 years ago, and I was trying to convince Cardiff University, where I used to teach, that my colleagues to go to Somaliland and to do this research. It took us about 10 years, this to come through. We started this 2016, and we were there August 2016. There were about 3 of us from Cardiff University, and there were another external consultant. We were 4 of us, and we had partners who were working with us, as Dr. Betr was saying, and that's Girls University, and also SONSOF. SONSOF is the civil society umbrella organization for Somaliland, which is very, very effective. This research is the first empirical academic research that has been done about Somaliland. You find out, you can Google. It is the first academic research that has been done, and it's true. I mean, why I'm saying that is the truth about it. We have some reports, also done in Somaliland, but I'm talking independent academic research done by academicians of Somaliland. If we go to this presentation, I don't want to talk much about, the conflict. That has been said, how it happened, and that's the context, key events, causes of conflict, impacts of the conflict, key villages of the conflict. All these has been discussed through. Therefore, I don't want to dwell on it. Next one, please. If we look here, I think Hassan and, the panel, they were talking about the history of Somaliland. This is in short. When you start from 1960, we can go through, and it's all showing the different dates, about what happened about Somaliland, up to 1991. Therefore, all these, 4 lines contains the history of Somalia, what has been through. I don't want to go through it, but I will share this presentation with anybody who wants. Causes of the conflict, if you go back. Causes of conflict. It is domination of Somalia and marginalization of Somalia. It has been said, I don't want to dwell on it. Then if we look, say, Hargeisa group, UFO, I think, where's Abdurrahman? Abdurrahman, he was very young, but I was one of the troublemakers. I one of the who created that UFO, and we were the troublemakers. And we have that testimony by Faisal and by Abdurrahman, who were in the schools at that time and who were throwing the stones. That's the history. I think what's good about this UFO is now the Commissioner of Human Rights of Somaliland, appointed by the President, is one of them. He was sentenced for a year, for a life, Mohammed Baroud. And now he's the Human Rights Commissioner. That's the good about it. Mohammed Haji Mahmoud, he's in the parliament. He's a member of the parliament. Therefore, that whoever, came through that 1980, still they are functioning. There are many, many of them who are functioning and doing a good job. Like Dr. Mohammed Abakar, he was head of the hospital at that time, and he was the chair and the director of many NGOs. Yeah, doctor. I don't want to go do all this. If you come to the next one, impacts of conflict. It has been taught. It has been said. That's atrocities. All these troubles that has been. Then we come to the key places. All the cities were destroyed. Then second one. If you go to I think now what we're going to has been said is the destruction. This is Hargeisa or any city in Somaliland or like that. Now people coming back, they are trying to rebuild their life. If you see that lady, she's trying to sell milk. That's what she's doing. And in this, struggle we have been through, and Dr. Betr talked about it, is the backbone were the women. Men were doing the fighting, and the women were doing the living. They were doing the business. This is the spirit and the entrepreneurship of the Somaliland people. While the war going on, the business was all going on. Our refugees, they were not depending on handout from the international community. They were working, and they were selling gold, even in the refugee camps, Tul'at, all this. That's how we survived, because the amount of aid we were getting for our refugees at that time was very minor. But people were working, and the diaspora were helping, from Cardiff, from London, from everywhere. That's our strength. Let's go. This is the destruction, okay? Here, over 300 Somalis or Somalilanders fleeing civil war across the border. And you see people who had decent life, now they are the desert of nowhere. And they are relying on this. This is what the people have been through, in practical way. Second one, please. Yeah. This is the study, highlights. In many cities, sub-Saharan African policy marginalizes the urban informal economy, and the informal economy workers are often victimized and harassed. This is a study done by comparing with other informal economies in the world, particularly in the sub-Saharan. And they got a lot of harassment in the sub-Saharan. That's what Dr. Betr was saying as well. If we look here, in Somaliland, it's completely different. In contrast, there is very little police harassment. Our police, they don't do that much harassment, to these informal traders. They do some, but when you compare to the world, it is not that much. Furthermore, there highlights levels of trust and cooperation among informal workers and the society, and deregulated environment which all enables and encourages growth, free enterprise, and the entrepreneurial spirit of Somaliland people. If we go at the end, here, as been through, this is the money selling. I think Dr. Betr also showed that. This is amazing. That's the Somali shilling exchanging with the dollar. And it is true that when they go to pray, they leave, this money in the street. Colleagues from Cardiff University, when they saw this, they said, is there somebody behind them who is taking a cut from them and looking after them? No, it is a social contract. Nobody is going to touch that money. Nobody. It's true. Therefore, when you go to the center of Hargeisa or Bur'o or Borama, you can see the money exchange over there, and nobody going to loot it. There is no thief. If anybody tries to loot or do a theft, the community will catch him. It's true. Yeah. Second one, amazing. This is life back. You see that lady, she came from refugee camps, and now she's working and she's a tailor. She's happy and she's making her earnings. This is what we are, Somalilanders. This is the true spirit of the entrepreneurship. Yes, here is the milk, and this is the camel milk. It's very, very. And this lady, she gets up in the 4 o'clock in the morning because she has to get her supply, and she has worked all the day, and maybe 8 o'clock in the evening, she's going home, and she's selling that. That's how she's earning her mainly delicious camel meat in every street. Second, this is the narcotic cat. Yeah. In fact, if we say how much we spend on that, when we talk about the practicality, and you look the balance of payments of Ethiopia government, the coffee was the major earning item for Ethiopia. It was coffee. Today it's the cat coming to Somaliland. At least about $700 million goes from Somaliland. Every day, I think $3 million goes from Hargeisa, Bur'o to Ethiopia. And that's why the money exchange gets high. In the evening, when it comes about 6 o'clock, that supplier of cat, he needs that dollar, therefore he can buy that dollar any amount he wants. And that's how the rate rises. And this is a problem for us. Second, thousands of voters queue to vote. This is the presidential election. How peaceful? Because where there is no peace or safety, there will not be any development. That's true. And this is how you see that, even that queue, nobody touching, no harassment, nothing. People are voting what they want and they're doing it. This is, the characteristics of the Somali people. Since 1991, we had changed 5 presidents. And thanks God. Okay, next one. This is our mainstay. This is what we export, animals. And this is Berbera. And this is our, gold. We don't have any oil, we don't have any much factories, but this is what we have, the Somali. Here we call, I think my colleague, he was talking about Gobernimo. This is, where most of the informal traders, they do their business. Now they are selling this in the street. The government is building this building for them now. And that's a plus, But when you see, they are over there in the street, but after a time they will go to that building, and still it's going on. Change of government. The new government, as 13th November, is committed to give more emphasis on local production, strategically aiming import substitution, particularly fishery and agricultural products. Before, we didn't have that policy, but now this policy is on the strategic plan. And the new government saying 30% of the budget has to go to development. It's a fact. I'm involved in the strategic plan. I'm one of the people and authors of that strategic plan 5 years. And this is good policy, because if you look fishery, our tuna fish, where it comes from? Our tuna fish, it comes from Thailand. And what's very strange is that ships, they took the tuna from our sea, and they took to Thailand, and they put in the tins, and then it comes back and they sell to us. This is true. Yeah. Therefore, this has to be changed, because our merchants or our business people, they can build factories in Somaliland. That's what I'm advocating. They have to build factories in Somaliland, rather important, and they can do it. It's not that expensive, to put a factory of, a factory of fishing. If you put it, it's not that much. I don't think it will be more than $2 million. It can be easily built. Therefore, it is not right. This policy has to be changed. The Ministry of Agriculture giving more support to local farmers, and allowing more farms and land in Togochali. We have a fertile land which can be the Ministry of Finance increased the development compound. I talk about that. That's 30% of the development. Gobernimo traders are more organized. They don't have a voice, the informal traders. But what we are creating now is cooperative for them. And I think if you look, in the findings of the research, it is written there that cooperatives to be created. And we will try to make a connection with the institutions here in UK, particularly in Wales, because the cooperative movement in Wales suits our needs, and that's what we are trying to tie up with. This is the stage. If you look at that's a small, medium, money policy, and this policy is drafted and needs of EIE traders are taken in consideration. The policy will be validated and implemented in the near future. I'd like to say that policy has been approved. Now, it's a law. Before, the informal traders, they were not part of the system. They were invisible. They were not part of the 5-year strategic plan. This is very important. And they make GMBG 75%. 75% of our gross national product is from informal traders. And they were not part of the strategic plan. But because of this research we did, we campaigned that informal trade to be included in the strategic plan. I'm glad, that the government approved that, and now it is part of the policy of the economic sector of the national development. That's the informal trade. That means the World Bank, the United Nations, every international institution will look now the informal traders' needs, because it's part of the policy. And that's a plus, that's an achievement. I think it's if I, summarize all this, what I like to say is, whatever that has been written in that strategic plan, most of the strategic plan items or recommendations has been progressive. And what is important is those, recommendations are tied up to the National Development Plan. That's very important. Therefore, this research done by Cardiff, it's extremely important. And what we are saying is, if the government follows that strategic plan recommendations, which they approved, many recommendations that we put to them, if they go through that, within 5 years, the economy of Somaliland will completely change. Yeah, that's our prediction, that's the way we see it. I don't want to dwell more on that, but all I'm saying is this research, the first academic research, the government welcome it, and if we look now, this is me, and that's Professor Allison from Cardiff University. That's we making presentation in last November to the ministerial meeting. The Minister of Trade was there. The Minister of Finance was there. The Minister of, Minister of Interior was there. Who is who? The Central Bank, director, governor was there. That's what we were doing and selling about the recommendation of the report. Second, this is the discussion chaired by the Minister of Trade, Tourism and Industries. If you look, that's the minister, and the person, that lady, sitting near to him, she's a Danish, and she's from Danida. Danida is one of the agencies that supports Somaliland a lot. This is, we are celebrating, and this is the minister there, and all the people involved there, and we are glad that research is approved, and now the recommendation is accepted, and we hope the progress we talk about. The other thing I'd like to highlight is, whatever written in that strategic plan is a public document. That's put in the website of the National Ministry of Planning, and now what we are looking, how to convince the international community to look at those recommendations and to fund them. That's our strategic plan. And this informal economy is part of it. Thank you very much.
List of individuals who have really supported the Somaliland pledge, both in the dark days of before the post 1991 to the present. So here are the names of the Somaliland friends. So if I could start off with our Right Honourable Alan Michael, for always being there with for the Somaliland community. Next to him is Stephen Doughty, MP for Cardiff South and Penarth, for also actually believing in the Somali community, and we've acknowledged your support. Jeffrey Howe, who is the Foreign Secretary, Kevin Brannan, MP, Mark Drakeford, AM, and also the leader of the Welsh Assembly. Elud Morgan, Pride Assembly Member. John Griffiths, Assembly Member. Adam Price, who's the leader of Plaid Cymru. Leanne Wood, the late Stefan Lewis, who unfortunately passed away last year, but he's the first ever one who actually put a motion through the Welsh Assembly. And I'd like to acknowledge that as well, because he's no longer here with us. The late Paul Flynn, Newport West MP. Inspector Dick Green, South Wales Police. PC Donovan, South Wales Police. PC Richard Payne, South Wales Police. God, we've got so many police officers. Thank you so much for all the support. Vaughan Gethin, the Assembly Member for Cardiff South and Penarth. The late Right Honourable Rodney Morgan, who's always been there from the beginning to really supporting us. His wife, Julie Morgan, Assembly Member. Jenny Anderson, Assembly Member. Lorraine Barrett, ex-Assembly Member. Ex-Councillor Gaynor Legel. Councillor Paddy Kitston. Councillor Harry Ernest. The late Councillor Jeff Mungham. The late Councillor Jack Brooks. Councillor Linda Thorne. Councillor Chris Weaver. Councillor Russell Goodway. Councillor Judith Woodman from Labour Democrats, the late Councillor Reverend Morgan, late Councillor Mohammed Javed, Councillor Dilwar Ali, Councillor Ali Ahmed, the late Councillor Peter Perkins, the late Councillor John Smith, who's no longer with us, the Lord Anderson of Swansea, and Lord Thomas. In terms of the academic world and other organisations and NGOs, we have Dr. Sarah Hayes, Wales Amnesty International. We have Tessa Hadley, Wales Amnesty International. We got Claire Hudson, HTV New Wales, and also BBC Wales, or BBC Cymru, Cardiff University. Dr. Peter Macki, who was here previously, but he had to leave for another urgent matter. Dr. Richard Gale, Cardiff University, who's also my supervisor at Cardiff University. Dr. Andrew Williams, also my supervisor from Cardiff University. We have Professor Alan Birknoch, Uwick University. Dr. George Carron, Uwick University. Dr. Alan Powler from Cardiff University. And the late Betty Campbell, head teacher, counsellor, community activist for Buttown. And which we're really pleased, actually, we're going to have our first ever statue of a black leading female in Wales outside Central Square. So good on that. So we've got David Middleton, Director of Save the Children, Alan Herbert, Community Development Manager, BRG, Jonathan Cox, Citizen Cymru, Angela Gorman, Life for African Mothers Organisations, John Townley, Wales for Africa Programme, Peter Brito, Community Relation Officer, Samina Khan, who is also with us. We would like to appreciate her support, especially towards our younger people. Steve Kyra, youth worker and Cardiff, I think he works for Horn Development Agency now. These are among the few, and I'm sure the list carries on in terms of all our friends, but in terms of our short space of time, these are the people that we really want to say thanks to, and really for supporting and believing in our cause. So before we end, I just want to pass it on to Eid Ali Salam, who would close the meeting. Thank you very much.
I won't say that much, but I just wanted, to thank, all the people who came here today, from the community, from the wider community, and our guest speakers here. We are very, very thankful, to them. And the situation now we were reflecting what happened before and how Ways, supported us. The Siad Barre, when he saw all those, publicity from Cardiff. And Alan Michael, he coined, that the hidden war going on in Somaliland. It was Alan Michael first who declared that in 1988. And at that time, we were making demonstrations and all this. HTV was Claire Hudson. She won 2 times, in Djibouti. And she was working the HTV. She was deported from Djibouti. Anyway, what we are saying is that history, we are celebrating what Wales did for Somaliland people. The other issue is Alan Michael, he's the one who made intervention with the Conservative government at that time and allowed a program that any Somalilander here can bring his relatives, not his spouse and children, his aunt, his uncle. It was a program never happened for any, refugees coming to this country. That's a plus. And the foreign minister at that time, we are saying, he's from Wales, isn't it? Jeffrey Howard. He's from Wales as well, and Conservative. Therefore, Wales, there's a special, connection with Somaliland. Now, we were talking about that report and the strategic plan and the 5-year plan. Somaliland now is a peaceful country, development, work. We have about 30 universities now. It's amazing. Maybe you say the quality needs to be improved. But what we're glad about is that at least, our young people getting somewhere to study. At that time when I was at secondary school, I was going to Mogadishu to get, a university. There was no university in Hargeisa. Now, with that plan, I talked about, and I put, the strategic plan, which I will circulate all of you. With the strategic plan, those elements of recommendations are public document. What we want from Wales is to take part of that development that Somaliland needs now. And we will give you all the information needed. Therefore, all I want to say is thank you very much, and it's a happy day, and we'll take from there. Thank you very much.